Today, we're going to talk a little bit about dependent clause fragments and how we can both identify and correct these fragments in our writing. First of all, we'll discuss how to identify a dependent clause fragment within your writing. It's most important to know what exactly a dependent clause is before we can tell whether it's a fragment or not. A dependent clause has a subject and a verb in it, just like any other sentence, but a dependent clause can't stand alone. In other words, it depends on another clause to be a complete sentence. Dependent clauses may begin with subordinating conjunctions or relative pronouns. These subordinating conjunctions or relative pronouns are a hint that will allow you to identify whether or not you have a dependent clause within a sentence. Now, let's rewind a minute and just do a little grammar vocabulary refresh. What is a subordinating conjunction? What is a relative pronoun? You may not remember these terms, so let's go over them quickly. A subordinating conjunction is a conjunction that introduces a subordinate clause, such as although or because. It's a type of conjunction, and again, as another gentle reminder, a conjunction is a word used to connect clauses or sentences or to coordinate words in the same clause. On the other hand, we have relative pronouns. Relative pronouns are used to connect a clause or phrase to a noun or a pronoun. I have a short list of the most common relative pronouns. If you can remember this short list, it will help you to identify your relative pronouns and in turn your dependent clauses. The most common relative pronouns are who, whom, which, whoever, whomever, whichever, and that. Of course, there are more relative pronouns than just these, but these are the most common ones you will run into the most often. I also have a list of common subordinating conjunctions. These, again, will help you to identify whether or not you have a dependent clause. If you can remember this list, you will be able to identify your dependent clauses. The subordinating conjunctions include the words after, although, as, because, before, even though, if, since, though, unless, until, what, whenever, where, whereas, and whether. Now we'll move on and talk about how to correct a dependent clause fragment. In order to correct dependent clause fragments, you have a few different options. First, you can join the fragment to a complete sentence, or you can add the necessary words to make it a complete idea on its own. You could also delete the subordinating conjunction. Next, I'll have a few examples of corrections for you to look at. In example number 1, we have the fragment underlined within the phrase. Here, the sentence says, in the city, houses are close together, whereas in the suburbs, houses have large yards. You can even hear it a little bit when I read these sentences aloud. The second sentence is clearly a fragment. It sounds a little awkward and needs to be corrected. An easy correction for this specific error would be to delete the subordinating clause or the subordinating conjunction, also called the subordinator. Here, where we deleted the subordinator whereas, our correction now reads, in the city, houses are close together. In the suburbs, houses have large yards. You can even hear the correction when I read it. For a second example, here the fragment is underlined yet again. The sentence says, before William Levitt built Levittown, many people lived in congested neighborhoods. This is also an easy correction. You can join the sentences in order to make it a complete idea. Our correction reads, before William Levitt built Levittown, many people lived in congested neighborhoods. You can hear that this sentence sounds much more correct than the previous sentence. Ultimately, finding, identifying, and fixing your dependent clause fragments will improve your writing substantially. Thanks for watching.